Hey guys, so I am going to be talking today a little bit more about the rhetoric of rhetoric rather than the article that or the chapter that was called What is Rhetoric? I actually read this one first, and I really appreciated how that one just kind of broke down all the different definitions of rhetoric and each of the components that kind of go into it. I had to make some notes that way I could kind of solidify those a little more in my mind because I've come across some of these terms and I'm like, what is this? And so this one I thought was extremely valuable for kind of understanding each of those underlying terms. What I liked most, though, was after having read that, I came to the rhetoric of rhetoric, and it kind of gave more, for me, a little bit more of a background as far as not necessarily like historical, although there is that, but also just a sense more of how rhetoric plays a part in everything, because that was one of the quotes on the first page actually that I highlighted, where it says rhetoric has no specific territory or subject matter of its own, since it is found everywhere. And as you read through Wayne Booth's chapter, you really get to see that, how everything really interplays, how the way my major takeaway from it was that rhetoric is kind of the explanation for reality, that reality can exist outside of rhetoric, but rhetoric, and I guess you could say language, is how we make sense of what we experience, what our reality is. So I kind of like that he made that distinction. And I appreciated how he kind of went through and talked a little bit about the different kind of like the movement through history of the study of rhetoric, and some of the misconceptions, which I kind of found were rather interesting. I loved his term trickery. I thought that was great, even though that's probably really a word and not something that he necessarily made up. But the definition that I found, besides the one on that first page that I read, was the quote that he gave from Francis Bacon, which says that rhetoric is the application of reason to imagination for the better moving of the will. It is not solid reasoning of the kind that science exhibits. And I thought that was kind of like something a little bit behind the hallmark of why people don't really understand what rhetoric is, and they have these misconceptions because they, later on in page 9, he talks about how, in this theoretical conversation between himself and another colleague, where it says that you're a preacher of the arts that have nothing to do with the truth, only persuasion. And so, but Francis Bacon kind of hits that, where it's not, it's different from science. It's the reasoning it's not scientific. You cannot, as he gets later on, you can't really quantify morality, I guess, scientifically, which I thought was really quite interesting to kind of think about, because I never really considered that. Another quote that I like that he included is on page 8, where it says that it's from Andrea Lunsford, where it says rhetoric is the art, practice, and the study of all human communication, and which is a huge and monumental task or field when you really think about it, because we, especially nowadays, we have so many different areas of communication. And let's see, when he starts to get into, on page 10, when he starts to get into listening rhetoric, I kind of felt like he jumped into rhetorology. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I felt like he kind of jumped into it too soon, because all of a sudden we had this whole new term, and I can tell that it is more of a push to make rhetoric something more of an academic field, or more of an accepted academic field, and I know that that's kind of lacking, it seems, based on this chapter. But aside from that, some of like the major, like I said, I'll go back and say that the major takeaways that I got from this is more of how reality, and this is getting more into like page 12 and that sort of thing. Reality, it exists. There are, according to Wayne Booth, that there are truths, and some are contingent on things, but some are not. Like they are just. He gives the examples of infanticide and slavery as just these are wrong. These truths. Excuse the crazy motorcyclist that just blazed by. But these realities and these truths, they kind of exist among themselves, and then rhetoric comes along and it gives like an explanation for that, and that it is it's kind of, like I said, to me, I took it as language is how we know and can interact with the world, is through language and rhetoric. So that's kind of what my takeaway was from his really interesting chapter. It is completely marked up, so I'm looking forward to talking about it this week. All right, see you guys on Monday.